Hello and welcome to therobarcher.com. I'm Rob Archer, and I'm joined by someone that I used to work with quite a bit back in the day at something called Radio, and his name is Charles Feldman. Charles, welcome.
How do you spell radio? Is it
R-A,
A?
I forget the rest.
Yeah,
It
yeah, something like
slips out
that.
of the mind.
Yeah, is it radio or radio or
Radio, I think it might be
radio? I think it's
Radio. Yeah, like
radio. Yeah,
Radio Drive.
yeah.
So we did a
Hey,
show
Rob.
called In Depth on KNX back
Yeah.
in the day, and I was looking at some clips, video clips of people interviewing President Trump and Trump administration officials. And there are a couple of examples of good anchors and good reporters asking those follow up questions, but they are so rare that they get a lot of attention when they press somebody on something. I'm thinking of Caitlin Collins, who will press an issue, and Jonathan Karl is good at that. And it reminded me of how you were all the time on In Depth. If you sense that someone wasn't answering the question or was giving you kind of a runaround or the political answer, you held their feet to the fire. And I wanted to ask you, where did you learn that?
I think part of it was was growing up in New York City, where you have to kind of be obnoxious in order to get along. But no, I think it's just a philosophy that I developed very early on when I got into the journalism trade, and I've worked in really every medium now. I mean, I've worked in print, I've worked for newspapers, magazines, wire services, radio, television. And I found very early on, or decided very early on, that if somebody is going to consent to an interview, and now I'm talking now for the moment because I'll divide it into two different kinds of people. I'm talking now about what I call civilians, somebody who's not a public figure, somebody who's not getting paid by taxpayers, but is what I consider to be a private person, but for whatever reason finds themselves in the news. That once they agree to be interviewed, to the interview process, then by definition, they also agree to answer the questions that are posed to them. And if they don't want to answer questions, then the opportunity was there very early on to say, no, thank you. I don't want to be interviewed. And they have every right to not be questioned by a reporter or an anchor. Every right in the world, to turn that down. But once they say, sure, I'll come on your broadcast, or I'll sit down with you if you're doing print and your tape recorder or digital recorder, I guess now. Once they do that, then I think that there's an implicit agreement that they will answer the questions, even if they are uncomfortable, that they are being asked. Otherwise, why bother? Uh, but I said that I divide people into two classes. One, the civilians that I just mentioned, but then there are the people who are government figures, people who are in positions of power, people who are getting paid on the taxpayer dime. They have no right whatsoever, in my view, to not respond to questions, especially if they're questions that are germane to the job function. Now, obviously, if an interviewer wants to ask personal questions that have absolutely nothing to do with what the person is doing in the public sphere, then that person, I think, does have the right to say, listen, that's a personal issue, and I'd rather not go into it. But even there, if it's a personal issue, but it's one that somehow overlaps with what that person is doing in the public sphere as part of their job or part of their position, then I think they have absolutely no right to refuse to answer questions. So when I am confronted by somebody who is a civilian who doesn't want to answer a question, then yes, I will keep pursuing it to a degree. At some point, if they're not going to answer, it becomes kind of, pointless to continue, and you have to kind of go down another road. If it's a politician, if it's a public figure, then I do tend to be far more relentless and not as willing to give them a pass. I just don't think that that's a good thing to do.
Why do you think that so many reporters in the atmosphere today, and I'm talking about talking with Trump administration officials who they repeat the president's claim that he's going to bring prescription prices down 600%. And
Yeah,
no one asked that follow-up question that I scream at the TV, and I bet you do too.
yeah.
So that means the pharma companies are going to pay us to take their pills. Why don't reporters and interviewers today ask those follow-up questions when they get a claim like that?
But you mean it doesn't mean that they'll pay us to
Yeah,
buy the
okay,
drugs?
that would be great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I gotta,
I'd love
I
it.
gotta, I gotta look now at my medicines. Why don't they? Because a number of reasons. One reason I think is fear of their own jobs. I think that there is a belief, and I think it is a misplaced belief among many reporters, especially younger ones that are just getting started or have not been doing it that long, that if they antagonize the person they're interviewing by pushing to get an answer, by refusing to back off when the question is perhaps uncomfortable, I think there's a concern that the person they're interviewing is going to get angry, pissed off, which they may, and they're going to go to the employer and try to get that person fired. And, if you're new on the job, or maybe you're just a few years into it, and you finally got your big break, and you're working for a TV station or a radio station or a newspaper, if there still are any, um, you're loath to want to rock the boat too much, so that your job, you perceive, may be in jeopardy. That's one key reason, I think. The other is also the mistaken belief that you want to become friends with the people you're interviewing. And I can go through, I won't, but I can go through a list of countless people I know who are in this business of ours, in broadcasting and print, who like to boast about all the people that, they go to, sometimes they go to dinner parties with, or they get invited to different functions. They get birthday greetings from, and they're proud of the fact that they're friends with these people. But that's not the job. The job isn't to be friends with these people. You don't have to be enemies with them, but you're not friends with them. Your job is to get information that they have, and then take that information and let the public know what it is you have learned. And sometimes often, that process is one that does lead to an antagonistic rather than cordial relationship. Now, again, I'm not saying you should go out of your way to be nasty to people, I mean, I don't think, and Rob, we sat next to each other doing that show in depth for a while. So, have no hesitation if you think I'm wrong in what I'm about to say. But I don't think I was ever deliberately nasty to anybody. I think I always started off wanting to genuinely know what it is, that they knew by asking questions, and then would only escalate my questioning, becoming progressively more maybe harsh or stern, maybe is a better word, if they continued to dodge the question. I think that's what I was doing, but you tell
I
me,
would
maybe I
agree with
wasn't.
that. You were never harsh or mean or antagonistic. You would get stern and you'd push, but it was never in a mean way. And there are a couple of people that we used to talk to quite a bit on the show who
Yeah,
would come on, and I think you know who I'm talking about. Would they loved that give and take with you? They knew that
yeah.
you were going to press them on the question, and I think they responded with they still liked you, they still wanted to talk to you, but they knew they were going to get pushed up against the wall.
Yeah, and I tell you, there was in all the time I was doing that show in depth, there was only one person, and I think it was before you and I were doing the show. I may be wrong about that, but There was only one person where I got so frustrated by them not answering the questions. And this was I won't mention the name, but it's the daughter of a very prominent California politician who also has national stature
Mhm.
in the national legislative branch of government. Um, and it's the only person I ever actually hung up on in the middle of an interview on the air live
Wow.
because she was not being responsive. And I thought it was a waste of, I mean, I didn't care about wasting my time. I was getting a paycheck no matter what. But I thought it was wasting the public's time if somebody was listening to the show to not have the decency to answer very legitimate questions, but questions that for whatever reason she decided she didn't want to answer. And so it came to a point where, I forgot how it actually finally reached that end. But basically, the end was I hung up on her and I terminated the interview on the air
Mhm.
and moved on because
Yeah.
there was no point. But here's the interesting thing, and this goes to something that you were just alluding to about how people sometimes come back for more. Much to my surprise, and I was surprised, several months later, that person did actually come back on the show, knowing full well that I was going to be doing most of the interviewing on that particular subject, and it was fine. I mean, she was fine, and it worked perfectly fine. And I'll tell you what I learned a long time ago that helped color this thing. Uh, I became friendly years ago with the late Mike Wallace from CBS, and I thought the real heart of 60 Minutes when 60 Minutes first went on the air a very long time ago. And I did get to know him because I was covering a trial at the time he was involved in. He and his producer were being sued by General William Westmoreland, who, of course, was the commanding general for the Vietnam War, or most of the Vietnam War, who sued CBS for libel for a broadcast that Mike Wallace was essentially the narrator, and he didn't really do the producing or reporting. But so I got to know him then, and then we became, friendly over the years. And I remember I did ask him the question, since everybody knows you're such a a prick when you interview people, why do they keep coming back? Why do these really powerful people line up practically to be interviewed by Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes? And his answer was something that I always remembered. He said, because they like the challenge. That these are people who, because they're powerful, they're CEOs, they're Congress people, they're presidents, they're royalty, they're movie stars. They all fancy themselves to be masters or mistresses of the universe. And so they want to go up, he would say, against somebody like him, like Mike Wallace, because they always thought that they could get the best of him. But here was the secret to this, which he totally understood. There was no way that was going to happen because he controlled the playing field. It was his turf.
Mhm.
It wasn't live, it was edited. Not to say that the editing process distorted things, but you were not going to win going up against Mike Wallace on his court. It was
Mhm.
just not going to happen. And I always have felt the same way in doing whether it was a TV or a radio interview, is it's our court. It's our home. They are invited guests, but at any point in time, we can shove them out the door because it's our door.
Yep. Speaking of getting shoved out the door, you have had people end interviews with you, and there's a very famous one,
Yeah.
went viral again recently. I'll play a clip.
The laws, because the media is so protected, and it's ridiculous that they're so protected, but they can write virtually anything. The difference is, with me, at least they pay some price. And I think more people should have that attitude, and I think you'd find a lot more accurate reporting, including yours.
What was inaccurate so far?
I thought your demeanor was inaccurate. I thought that questions that you were posing to people in my organization were inaccurate and false and unfair.
Well, questions by definition can't be inaccurate. They're questions.
Well, I think the questions themselves were put in such a way that made them statements, and they became statements as opposed to questions, and I think that's not good reporting.
Such as?
It doesn't matter. I mean, I don't think your viewers would be very interested in it, nor do I want to embarrass you.
No, I don't think I would be, but let's talk about what we talked about yesterday. Those in the financial community I'm talking about, and we talked about this on the phone, who have said, and this is them saying it, not me.
This is them? What do you mean by them? This is one or two people, and what about the positive people?
5 or 6, but the ones who said negative things, and
here we are.
Well, we've got to talk
back to the negative.
Back to the negative.
Back to the. You know what? Do this interview with somebody else.
Well, we talked about this yesterday on the phone. This is exactly what we talked about.
Do the interview with somebody else. Really. Yeah, you don't need this. Do it with somebody else, and have a good time with it. Because frankly, you're a very negative guy, and I think it's very unfair reporting. Good luck.
I disagree with you. Sorry you feel that way. There's nothing that we didn't discuss on the phone, Donald.
And so you interviewed Donald Trump back in the day, before he got involved in politics. And as he walked away from you, you wanted it on the record that you had agreed to certain things, certain topics that you were going to talk about. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I had known President Trump, Donald, in those days for a good number of years in the 80s, because I was doing a lot of business reporting at the time for CNN in New York. And Trump was, considered somebody who was good to get an opinion from about major economic developments. Nowadays, I kind of question that wisdom, but in the 80s, that was the case. And so it wasn't unusual for me to take a camera crew and call him up, if something was happening overseas or something was happening with interest rates or real estate, which of course was his claim to fame, real estate in Manhattan. And it wasn't unusual for me to call him up in Trump Tower and say, Donald, do you have a half hour? I'd like to come over with my camera crew and we can talk about whatever it was. And most of the time, if he was around and he wasn't doing anything, it was yes. And he was always extremely charming, and he was often funny. And it was a side of Donald Trump that I suspect is still there in private, but that he doesn't show publicly, certainly not since he got into politics. But I found him to be a very, easy guy to talk to, and very, very gracious to me and my camera crew, until it came a point where he got into the casino business in New Jersey, and stories very early on started to circulate that the casino was not capitalized enough, and that it was probably going to go belly up. So CNN decided, since I was doing investigative reporting in those days, that I and my producers should take a look at that. And so we did. We spent a good number of months, went to public hearings, many of which Trump was at. I interviewed lots of people in the Trump organization, and we did come to the conclusion, my producers and I, that the stories were accurate, that the casino was not capitalized, and it was probably destined for failure, which, by the way, it did, not that long after the piece aired. So after doing all the sort of legwork and the interviews, because you kind of work your way up usually in these kinds of stories, you talk to the underlings and then you go the next rung up, and it was time to sit down with Trump and confront him with what we had learned and get his response. So I called him the night before, which was a standard practice for complicated stories, not to give the person the questions. We would never do that, but to give them kind of a general idea. Look, this is sort of what we have found. These are the areas. When we sit down with you tomorrow, the purpose isn't to say gotcha. We want to get a honest answer to what we felt were very honest questions about how that casino was being operated and funded. So we went through all that, and it was fine on the phone. And we made the appointment for the next day to show up, and we did with my producers and the camera crew. And the minute we started the interview, it became crystal clear that there was something weird going on. And by that, I mean, he was coming across as if he was surprised and shocked by these allegations that were out there about his funding for the casino. He took great umbrage, even though he knew it, that I had interviewed many people in the Trump organization at the time. So he was putting on what I felt for the camera, basically theater. He was trying to show that he was offended, and he started saying nasty things about CNN, even in those days, and about me. And then there came a point where he decided to terminate the interview, and he kind of took off his microphone, and which was on his the lav was on his, I forgot if it was his tie or his the suit jacket, I forgot, but he yanked it off and dangled it for a minute or so in front of me, wanting me to take it from him, which I was determined not to do. So instead, he just got tired of holding it, and so the mic dropped to the table. But you can still hear the ambient sound, and he shook my hand. He put out his hand and told me, basically what a terrible reporter I was being, and being unfair, and then exited the room. And then what you were referring to is you can hear me at the end of that clip, and it was very deliberate. I did that very deliberately. I say to him, but Donald, this is what we talked about, last night on the phone, because I wanted it clear to viewers that this was an act he was doing, that none of this was surprising to him. He had more than an ample opportunity the night before on the phone to get angry. He deliberately pulled this stunt to come across as if he was being this wounded victim, and was being, caught unawares by the big bad reporter. He then proceeded to try to get both me and my producers fired, which shows something even then about his temperament and his attitude toward the press. And again, keep in mind that I knew him. This wasn't like he had no idea who I was. We knew each other. But he called the then president of CNN, and got all the way up to Ted Turner, who of course founded CNN and was very much a part of it at the time. And whatever the communication was, Turner didn't buy it. And so we did continue with the story, and we put it on the air, including the clip that has lived on in eternity. It seems. So anyway, so that's the story about the clip, and I have years since then, not in a very long time now, but I actually had occasion twice more to have a brief discussion with him way before he went into the White House. And it was fine because he's very transactional. He hates you when it's in his estimate to his advantage to hate you, and he likes you when it, in his view, is his advantage to like you. It's just the way he is.
All right. Well, there you have it. Charles Feldman and Rob Archer together again on In Depth.
Missed you.
Thanks for being here with us, Charles. I appreciate it. And thank you for listening to therobarcher.com.